All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. I've got 11:50 on the nose, and I like to be on time. So again, welcome back to our sessions here. I'm glad that everyone's been able to join us. I've gotten some really great feedback. My phone's been blowing up in the little break that we had. But I want to tee it up for Anthony here. Anthony Delaney and Dr. Ankit Chandra to talk about some of their work. This session is on small scale irrigation, small scale mechanization and irrigation. And they're doing some great work here at the Dougherty Water for Food Global Center. So with that, I am going to turn off my screen and just leave it to you to go ahead and present. The floor is yours.
Awesome. Well, first, I just want to thank Nate for the opportunity to present some of our work. Thank you, everybody, for being here. I hope that I can teach you as much as I've been able to learn from all of you. So, just to jump right into it, we'll talk a little bit about kind of my perspective on irrigation and mechanization, just from a researcher's perspective. I'll go a little bit, do an overview of the innovation lab that we were awarded last October, and I'll talk about some of the initial activities for the lab. Um, and so really just briefly, mechanization for people who are doing manual labor for 16 hours a day. If you can introduce a simple technology or a machine to transition away from that manual labor, you can really revolutionize communities, and you really end up having an enormous impact. These machines can literally change the way that people live their lives. It'll make you less reliant on animals, more opportunities for increased youth education to get kids out of the field and into schools, just improved quality of living around the board. And I know I don't need to preach to the choir on that one, but mechanization also helps overcome this constraint that we often find in the agricultural and the rural labor market, which is just a lack of people to work. And so case studies are also showing that the sequence of input adoption is really important. The adoption of certain mechanization doesn't necessarily result in the return on investment if other inputs haven't been adopted first, such as improved seed or irrigation. And so for that reason, we find that irrigation mechanization is often one of the first steps that many smallholder farmers will take. And so if they are going to invest in irrigation, they'll often couple that investment with other inputs to really get the most of their return on investment. Because ultimately, these investments need to result in greater profits for the farmers. That's the only way that we're going to improve livelihoods and well-beings, and that's the only way that, like we were talking about earlier, that's the only way that you're going to convince a farmer to make these investments is by showing them the economic benefits of that investment. And so, just to touch a little bit on the current research trends, despite this huge anticipated benefit of transitioning to mechanization, there are still a lot of constraints in the farm mechanization ecosystem that really limit the ability for smallholder farmers to get access to those equipment and tools. And what we have found, and there's several projects, research projects in South Asia and Sub-Saharan Africa, it really suggests that the mechanization as a service model makes those technologies much more available to farmers. Um, but there are other factors such as policies, financial regulations, and we kind of touched on it earlier, but energy costs, those keep those equipment prices just high enough to be out of the reach of larger farmers or other entrepreneurs who could offer those mechanized farm services. And really to amplify the message that Chittaranjan gave earlier, the focus is not on growing the yield, but more on maximizing resources that are available to maximize the farmer's return on investment. So that doesn't necessarily mean having the highest yield. It just means, are you using your inputs wisely, right? So that's more of the emphasis that we're kind of focusing on. Recent research that points to knowledge gaps in suitable pathways for sustainable adoption of mechanization. So really taking into consideration the context-specific economic conditions, agroclimatic conditions, and other social factors that could be at play in the system. And in other words, we need more evidence to design technical and institutional solutions, such as using a socio-technical bundling approach to avoid artificially pushing mechanization into areas where that mechanization is not suitable. Oh, sorry. And so this is just a kind of a visual of that represents a lot of what we've been talking about. But really, this entire mechanization ecosystem has to be in place in order to effectively implement these new technologies. So, for example, you need equipment dealers that they need a sufficient market of buyers to warrant going into a particular area. You need financial service providers that have you've demonstrated uh, income before providing that asset, the financing for those assets in really what is considered kind of a risky sector for those financial service providers. So you have to provide that evidence that there is income to be made there to get those services, those financial services. You also need skilled maintenance workers, right? And this is really, really important because if kind of like the example that Nate gave earlier, if you can introduce the technology, you can introduce the equipment, but if it breaks and you're fixing it with a handkerchief, that's not going to help the sustainability or the longevity of those technologies. And same thing with potential tractor owners. So the potential owners of that equipment have to perceive that there is a solid business opportunity to be able to access affordable financing and maintenance and really succeed in reaching those final customers, which is the local farmer, right? And so the local farmer needs to be confident that their investment into uh, these mechanization technologies, that they have a market to move their product in, that they're going to be able to make a profit if they invest into these mechanization inputs. And so really in the absence of any of these individual components, the mechanization ecosystem can't function. And so even just to bring the prosperity systems tractor to the example, that's an amazing innovation. But if we don't look at that in the context of this entire ecosystem, then it doesn't necessarily matter how um, impactful that technology is. If you don't take everything else into consideration, then you're just not going to be able to actually execute anything. And so our innovation lab will have a very strong focus on this serve-in provision aspect and really taking into consideration this entire ecosystem that has to exist in order for mechanization to thrive. And so briefly, I'll just talk about the overview of the innovation lab. So that's the name of the innovation lab is the Innovation Lab for Irrigation and Mechanization Systems. So I just pull that to ILMS just because it's a mouthful and it makes me sound silly whenever I have to say that whole thing. And so just some background, it's a cooperative agreement through USAID. We were awarded the end of 2023, so it'll go through 2028. The Dougherty Water for Food Global Institute was the awarded entity for that award. It's composed of $19 million of core funding that runs through 2028 with the potential of having it be extended depending on the impact that we're having. There's also another $21 million in potential complementary funding. So the awards, we are the managing entity, and essentially we'll be sub-awarding out this funding to other partners. These are going to consist of competitively awarded activities, and some of these will be commissioned sort of as priorities emerge. So that kind of gives us the ability to be flexible as we execute the award. And so these are the countries that we're focused on: Ghana, Ethiopia, Rwanda, and really we wanted to include what we're referring to as Eastern and Southern Africa regions. We wanted to really allow ourselves the potential to work in more countries in Africa if we found opportunities or if we had requests from other USAID missions in those countries to go in there. So we're working on a partnership with the USAID mission in Niger right now, for example. We also included Nepal in South Asia, and in Latin America, we're focused on Honduras and Guatemala. And so, as part of our proposal, we outlined 5 areas of inquiry as our primary areas of focus. And so, for the first area of inquiry, the idea here is that we need to move beyond individual technology pushes where we just say, here, this is, you have your problem. This is the technology that you should use, and this is going to fix all your problems. We know that that just doesn't work. There's this recognition that technologies require other complementary investments. So it could be access to finance. It might be multiple technologies, right? So you might have an irrigation or water lifting technology or a pump that you have to bundle with other types of technologies like soil moisture sensors so that you don't have overwatering, right? So you might have 2 technologies or multiple technologies that have to be used together. So really, we're moving beyond individual technology pushes to really start to think about packages and how can we make those packages adaptable to different contexts so that farmers have options about what they can use and what would be most beneficial to their particular area. And so our second area of inquiry, we really want to focus on strengthening institutions and natural resource governing institutions more specifically. And as you know, you can introduce new technologies, you can introduce new practices, you can work on strengthening markets, and all of those steps that you take will have unintended consequences, but also they'll have expected consequences that you need to that they need to be managed and mitigated. So, as part of the research that we're doing, we don't want to neglect the stewardship and sustainability of our resources, right? So, if we unlock this tool, which is irrigation, then we want to make sure that it's being monitored and governed properly so that we don't squander those resources. And so really, like when we talk about irrigation, we're talking about agricultural water management more broadly. So considering the whole range of either rain-fed systems, supplemental irrigation systems, or fully irrigated systems. And so the other critical part of what we're looking at is market systems. And I know that we've kind of hammered that so far with a lot of the discussions that we've been having. But really, where the areas that we're doing a lot of our work, the public systems and the public agencies, they don't really have the capacity to keep up with the expansion of irrigation and just the changing water management requirements, or oftentimes the market systems just aren't fully developed. So there's a lot of gaps in these market systems, right? And that could be anything from equipment supply, service, finance, rental markets. And so there's a lot of things that really fit under this market system. And so there's a range of areas that fit in these market systems that are part of that suitable bundling that we were talking about. So, what would work in that specific market system? What would you have to have in that system for this to work? And so the other part about this is it's a mechanism for sustainability. And kind of like what Nate was saying earlier, the last thing we want to do is have this project where we go into these areas and we make this impact, and then as soon as we leave, all the access that was available to those farmers is all of a sudden gone, right? So what we really are trying to do is leave a stronger link between those actors within that market value chain to ensure that the farmers have sustainable access to those inputs, and that when the project is over, those resources don't just evaporate along with the project, right? So it's really strengthening those relationships and those links between the market actors. And So it's a really important area that we're looking into. Um, and really, any innovation lab with USAID requires this human capacity development. But for our innovation lab, we really wanted to consider this like an actual area of research. Um, we know that there are huge gaps in capacity at different points in the market system. Um, and then there's different points in public agencies around capacity. The problem is we don't always know what those gaps are specifically, right? We don't know what the skills that are needed now and what skills are needed into the future. We also don't necessarily know what education institutions or universities or training programs, we don't necessarily know what they're preparing people for. So at the same time, we don't want to necessarily uh, we don't necessarily know what private companies need in terms of the skills and the human resources. So we want to make sure that we're identifying those gaps and we're trying to figure out what capacity is needed and then who is in the best place to support that capacity development. And so that's would be our fourth area of focus. And then lastly, um, we want to focus on nutrition sensitivity and thinking about irrigation and mechanization from the health and nutrition aspects and impact that irrigation can have on health. And so really in the research community, there's this increasing movement towards considering irrigation as a nutrition sensitive instrument. And so we want to gather that evidence and show that link um, between increasing household income, expands access to food, and all this in general improves nutritional security, and it fosters a greater resilience within the community. So it's looking at irrigation through a One Health lens. And just briefly, One Health is healthy environment, healthy animals, and healthy people. Because if we don't have a healthy ecosystem, you don't have healthy people, right? So it's really trying to view this in a holistic systems approach instead of just looking at one particular problem and trying to address it. It's addressing the entire ecosystem of problems and trying to address them all at once to really overcome some of these issues that we face. And so that leads me into some of the initial projects that we have going on. So we're partnering with International Food Policy Research Institute, and it's another mouthful, so I just call them IFPRI. This study was really developed to give us the where. So if you're a development bank or companies or governments that are trying to expand into the global south, they really want to understand where can we concentrate our efforts. And so this is study is developing this mechanized propensity index, which will help us understand the where to focus for this project. We also, another activity is with the University of Missouri. And so really they're trying to help us find the missing pieces. Where are the gaps in capabilities? Uh, we need to understand more specifically what's needed now and what's needed in the future so that we can better prepare our trainers, right? So like Elkanah, who is the aggregator of the farmers in his community, what kind of tools do we need to make sure that he has so that he can teach the farmers on the ground and have that grassroots knowledge spreading. So that's a really important part of what the University of Missouri is working on right now. And then we also have a partnership with Tetra Tech. They're looking at carbon credit assessments because we want to link the carbon market, so the carbon credit market, with the end cost of these irrigation pumps for farmers. So if we can make that link, then you ultimately end up making those the end users not have to pay as much for those products. So that's what Tetra Tech is working on for us. And um, lastly, I just want to take this opportunity. I'm going to shamelessly plug my social media. Again, this is just one of those metrics that that's how we show impact. And so please come check us out on our website. We have socials. We have X, LinkedIn, and Facebook. So follow us, come check us out. And we also have a newsletter that we send out quarterly. So come check out our newsletter, come sign up, and follow what we're doing. And with that, I will turn it over to Ankit so he can present his policy work related to irrigation and mechanization in India. So thank you so much, everyone. I'll stop sharing my screen now.
Thanks, Anthony. Nate, thank you so much for the opportunity. I'll try to wrap up in the given time. And let me share my screen.
You're doing just fine, Dr. Chandra. Don't worry about being too concise. I'm sure people would be very, very happy to hear from you. And I don't see any questions. I don't see any questions flooding in just yet. So no pun intended when I say flooding in. So
awesome. Awesome. Yeah. So I'll start my presentation. You guys can see my presentation, right?
Yes. Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Hey everyone, my name is Ankit Chandra. I'm a research program manager at the Water Food Institute, and I work on research projects that are related to irrigation entrepreneurship, policy, and technology innovation. So today I will be talking about irrigation mechanization in India and the trends and challenges encompassing that. So for today's presentation, I will be deriving some of the insights and findings from a couple of papers, research papers that we have co-authored at the Institute. One is a policy paper which discusses about the implications of irrigation pump in India. And the second one is a paper in the Science Journal, which discusses the risk and challenges due to the solar irrigation, which is happening quite well in India. If anybody would like to download the paper, I have a QR code here, so go ahead and feel free to download that. So as I proceed, I would like to set clear expectations of what I'll be talking about today. And I will start by giving you a flavor of irrigation mechanization in India. How does irrigation mechanization looks like in South Asia, an overview of how it appears and why irrigation mechanization is important for the region. Next, I would like to briefly touch on the key theme of today's webinar, which is millet and sorghum, and so how that is associated with irrigation and why that matters, right? It's important. Then I'll be delving into some of the key trends in Indian irrigation pump market, what are some of the risks and challenges followed by that, and then I'll present a conclusion, not exactly conclusion, but what's the way forward for Indian irrigation mechanization. All right, so my colleague Tony has already done an excellent job of explaining what's irrigation mechanization, so I'm not going to delve deeper into the structure and definition of what is irrigation mechanization, but essentially utilizing different kinds of irrigation technologies and machineries in pumping and distribution of water is considered irrigation mechanization. And so in South Asia, where agriculture is an important component of economy and where water resources are often poorly managed and limited, irrigation mechanization becomes really, really important, especially for India, which is the largest user of groundwater resource. And but why, how India became the largest user of groundwater? That's a big question, right? So what has happened that over decades of irrigation development, private industries and governments in India invested huge amount of money in developing these infrastructure. And that started becoming a norm. And so with more and more private players coming into the space, they have started selling pumps to smallholder farmers for convenient irrigation. And so the private irrigation industry is primarily involved in manufacturing and distribution of irrigation equipment, such as drip lines, sprinklers, pumps, etc. And some of the examples include companies like Irrigation, CRI Pumps, Netafim, Crompton pumps. These are some of the larger incumbents in the space in India. Now, you're seeing here 3 pictures, and the first one would give you a sense of the density of their local presence and the regional presence in small towns and villages. The retailer and distributor network have reached out to every nook and corner in India. And so that has led to adoption of about more than 30 million pumps in the Indian subcontinent. I'd like to show you a picture of an Indian map. And so it looks like this. Let me crash my screen. Yeah, so this is a picture of a spread of groundwater wells and tube wells in South Asia. So you'll get a sense of how much irrigation pumps, including diesel and electric pumps, are there in India. So this is pretty dense. Okay, sorry. So the other 2 pictures are basically, they depict the type of irrigation technologies being used in India. Like these are diesel pumps and electric pumps at a store in a region in India called Bihar. There's another picture that's showing what kind of recent technologies, which is kind of solar irrigation pump a farmer is using in one of the regions in North India. So we'll talk more about that in the coming slides around technology adoption and pumps. Now, the key theme of today's webinar is millets and sorghum. So I'd like to briefly touch this one and how irrigation mechanization is linked with millets and sorghum, right? From the perspective of climate adaptation and resilience, there are only few crops which are really well suited for environmental stress than millet. So it really requires significantly less amount of water than wheat and rice, which is widely grown in India. And they can also survive a lot of stress condition. So I wanted to show you this graph, this map of India that shows the energy costs associated with irrigation pumping. So if you look at the states color in green, these have nearly 0 energy costs associated with groundwater for irrigation. And so these are also the states where, what I mean with that, when there's no pumping, what has happened over time is that farmers have overpumped those particular regions, and now these regions are becoming under water stress. And so in response to that, what has happened is that these states are taking really huge steps in growing millets at a larger scale. And India is currently one of the largest producer of millets. And so if you look at these states like Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, these are the top 4 producing states, millet producing states in India. So India is taking on a leadership position in the global conversation on millets and irrigation mechanization as a solution to water and food security. And so that's a great step forward, I would say. So just wanted to give you this message through this slide. So now I've discussed about the irrigation and millet in India. I would like to focus the rest of presentation on irrigation pump adoption and why that matters. What are some of the key trends we are seeing in irrigation mechanization? So the first trend that came from that research was that we are seeing a shift in adoption of irrigation pumps from diesel to electric and solar pumps. So if you look at the numbers, if you look at this graph here, you'll see the diesel and electric pump are pretty much stable over the years. And the solar irrigation, which was almost nothing in 2014, and that has jumped to somewhere around 2 to 3 million in numbers in 2022. So, and first of all, I would like to touch about why there is a shift from diesel to electric pump. And the reasons we gathered were, the first one is that diesel prices have hiked so much over the decade. It's like 150% hike in diesel prices. We also noticed that electric grid connected pumps are comparatively, they have lower running and maintenance costs. So farmers said that one-time submersible pump set is installed, it also elevates the fear of the pumps being stolen from the field. So those are some of the reasons why we are seeing a shift from diesel to electric pump. Now there has been a lot of push on agricultural sustainability, cleaner energy, climate adaptation, and so because of which we are seeing a market shift towards solar irrigation pumps. And so, and these solar irrigation pumps come in a variety of variety of technologies. So these can be standalone solar pumps, these can be grid connected solar pumps, and we are seeing some expected solar pump around 2 to 3 million in India at this point of time. However, the number of solar irrigation pump is not exactly measured because we don't know, and some of those are because of unreported sales and stuff like that. But both government and the private industry have been promoting widespread adoption of solar irrigation pumps to replace diesel and electric pump, mainly because of two reasons. One is to reduce the carbon emissions, and the second one is to reduce the groundwater depletion, which is happening in India since a long time. But however, one of the challenge we see is an environmental risk. And what I mean with that is, solar irrigation pumps are often used as a standby pump to complement diesel or electric pump rather than replacing them. So that's becoming a problem. So this can result in total water and energy use increase because with solar irrigation, there's no pumping cost associated. So that's a risk, that's a challenge associated with the growing solar irrigation market and the pumping scenario in India. All right, the second trend that we notice is that there are government subsidies and blended financial models for irrigation pumps and also for irrigation systems. And they're pretty much on rise, but adoption is still very slow. The growth is still very slow. And why is that? If we talk about the solar irrigation subsidies, specifically one of the subsidy that comes to my mind is, sorry about that, the Prime Minister Kusum Solar Scheme, and it has three components. I won't go into the details of the scheme, but I would like to briefly touch into what are these components. The first component is component A. Under this model, farmers can set up solar or any kind of renewable power plant on the land and can sell the surplus power to discoms. And discoms are basically distributed companies who buy electricity and power from these farmers. Component B, under this model, the idea is to install about 2 million off-grid solar irrigation pump to replace diesel or electric pumps to solarize the connection. And then there is this component C. Under this model, farmers with the existing grid connected pump sets, they are eligible to get subsidies from the government to connect solar irrigation, to integrate solar with the pumps. And they can also sell any kind of excess or surplus power to the discoms. Now, how financial support is panned out is through a blended financial model. So the central government, if you look at the table here, it'll give you a sense of that. So the central government puts in 30% subsidy, the state government puts in 30% subsidy, the bank finances 30%, which is an agricultural loan, and 10% is upfront contribution from the farmers. So we try to look into numbers of how much farmers will have to bear as an upfront cost. So when we crunched the numbers and then understood how much money a smallholder would need to pay, we found that it's somewhere around in the tune of 500 of initial investment that they have to put in upfront. On top of that, they have to take an agricultural loan of $1,200 to $1,700 with some sort of collaterals staking. So the upfront initial investment is still very high for smallholder farmers. In a different scenario, if you look at the electric pump or diesel pump, where farmers can be an owner of that particular electric or diesel pump for around $100 to $300. So that's one of the hiccups why farmers are not increasingly going towards solar irrigation pumps. So that's upfront initial cost of investment is very high when you consider both agricultural loan and what farmers have to put out of the pocket. But farmers who switch from diesel to electric to solar irrigation pump, they said that they have the margins have increased due to negation of irrigation cost. So that's a good thing which is happening due to solar irrigation. The livelihood have increased, but the records only show that there's a small section of farmers who get subsidies for solar irrigation pump in the country. And the previous studies have also showed that these subsidies are mostly acquired by rich and influential farmers in the country. So that's a challenge with this second trend I would like to highlight. Well, the third trend we are seeing is around some of the informal water markets and the transitioning into private. So what informal water market is, I would like to explain that first before I go into the whole trend. So in a typical setup in India, what happens is the farmers own portable irrigation equipments like irrigation pump, and they also rent it to the local farmers, smallholder farmers who cannot afford bigger equipment for irrigation. So these kind of transactions are called water transactions or informal water markets in India because these are unregulated. And these kind of structures are becoming more and more entrepreneurially driven. So you can call them irrigation as a service. One of the trends that my friend Tony pointed out in the beginning of his presentation was this. So the service model is becoming really, really popular. If you look at the picture here, this is a mobile irrigation equipment where an entrepreneur or a private entity is coming to irrigate the crops on farmers' field, and that's how the transactions are quite happening in India at this point of time. I think if we look one state to a state like Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, they're like 60% of farmers are using irrigation service from either other farmer or using irrigation service from a private entity or an entrepreneur or a startup. We also try to look into the numbers of what's happening. So we collected some data from field from two states. One is Bihar and Uttar Pradesh, and second one is Uttar Pradesh. Uttar Pradesh is one of the largest irrigated state in India. What we found was that somebody who is on diesel irrigation as a service, the per season cost comes around $50 to $60, and somebody who's on electric irrigation as a service, the per season costs come around $40 to $60 per season, and somebody who is opting for a diesel irrigation as a service, their costs come around $80 to $100 per season. And we collected these for Rabi crops, utilizing 4 to 5 irrigation events in one season. And so I would also like to show you this picture here. So if you look at the map of India here, and the yellow states, right, where we collected data from Uttar Pradesh and Bihar, these are the state with the highest pump energy cost of pumping groundwater. That was one of the reasons why we collected the data from there. And so it makes sense when you have to pay $350 as an energy cost for just pumping groundwater, and that's an average cost. It makes sense to opt for an irrigation as a service model rather than going for owning the equipment. So it all made sense to us. But one of the challenges with this model is that we don't have enough evidence, enough research of how to scale these economies, what the unit economics look like. So we need to collect more data from field to understand economics of these transactions. All right, that takes me to my last slide, which is what's the way forward, right? So first one is bolstering groundwater governance on the community level. So what I mean with that is just understanding behavioral and decision-making aspects on a community level, while considering links between, what are the crop choices, how is the groundwater availability, and what kind of irrigation technology can play an important role in sustainable irrigation mechanization. It becomes really important to consider this at a community level, because most of the problems associated with crop choices or water are local and really context driven. So bolstering that governance within that community level and working that on local level becomes really important. Linking crop choices and groundwater availability and the irrigation technology, the three things. The second way forward, I think, is kind of designing incentives for water efficient practices, with both having crop and technology in mind and tying them with value chain. So you can think of how somebody can make an alternative cropping system, how somebody can switch from rice, which is water guzzling crop, to millets, right? So empowering farmers through incentives for water efficient practices can motivate a shift towards sustainable cropping system, such as millets, and tying these incentives with the government programs. There are district level government systems, governance system like Krishi Vigyan Kendra, and the value chain governance system like public distribution systems are there, through which farmers, they sell their produce and all. So that would really enhance the overall value chain efficiency once you start tying the incentive on water efficient practices and with the value chain incentives. So that would make sense in long term. And then the third is a clear one. We need more and more evidence on alternative financial structures and business models. Like I pointed out, irrigation as a service, right? So irrigation service provision, how you collect more and more evidence of these kind of business models, and to provide long-term, cost-effective and organized groundwater transactions. So that will become really important moving forward when we think about crop choices and irrigation mechanization for smallholder farmers. So with that, I would like to conclude my presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra, and thank you to Anthony as well. I've got a question for both of you, and I can use examples from both of the regions which you spoke about. One is about adoption, again, which we talked about earlier, adoption, and then the other is going to be about stewardship. So, Dr. Chandra, I'll start with you. Thank you for sharing, the situation in India, the availability of pumps and things like that. That's fantastic. The question I have around adoption is this. The last time I was in India, which would have been the end of January, early February, I was in Delhi. And in Delhi at that time of year, they have terrible, terrible fogs, so much so that it'll actually completely stop the traffic, stop flights, et cetera, et cetera. And I was spending some time with a retired researcher from the Ministry of Agriculture. And I said, my gosh, is it always like this? And he says, no, just the last few years. And I said, well, what happened? He said, of course, part of it is the smog, the air pollution in Delhi. He says the other part is the farms around Delhi that are all using flood irrigation. And they're using, and this is what he told me, I haven't checked into it to see if this is true or not, but he says that they use so much flood irrigation, so they pump so much groundwater that moisture gets put back into the air and comes back down as fog. And I said, my God, we haven't used flood irrigation in Nebraska in 30 years. Why are you still doing it? And here's where the adoption piece comes in. He explained to me that these farm families have people in their family that are not educated, they can't get any other work, and their job is just to move pipe from field to field. And so rather than adopting new technology that would conserve their groundwater and benefit them in the long run, they're maintaining this unskilled, low-income job for their family members. So that's the one. So put a pin in that. So now, Anthony, I'm going to turn this over to you and talk about stewardship. So one of these communities we visited in West Pokot, Kenya, they're on a river, they're wanting irrigation because their maize and everything has died, their animals have died. And when they look across the river, the next village over has good irrigation, and they're pumping so much water. Their corn, their maize looks amazing, right? And this community wants to do the same thing. And trying to have the conversation with them that, okay, well, if you have irrigation, you shouldn't be pumping that much because you're taking water from somebody who had it who wouldn't have had it otherwise, that did have it before, right? Somebody downriver. Thinking about people downriver. Now, we've had water disputes in the US. You can look at the Pacific Northwest. You can look at the Nebraska-Kansas Republican River feud. You can talk about even now what's going on with the canal project between Nebraska and Colorado. The difference is that we have legal structures and systems in place to handle these through that system. These communities don't. So from a stewardship standpoint, if we provide better access to small scale irrigation in some of these more arid places where everyone's dependent upon the water, but they've never had to deal with these issues, is an unintended consequence going to be disputes, violent disputes between communities. And how do we provide the education to prevent that unintended consequence? So there's a lot to unpack for those, but you guys decide how you want to handle either one.
Well, I can jump in. That's spot on, Nate. And that's a really good question. I mean, your observation was fairly well. And what has happened in the Indian scenario is that irrigation pumping, in the first place, it does a lot of pollution. So if you're on diesel pump, so basically, if you look at the numbers, I think 5 to 6% of the pollution comes from irrigation pumping. So how you manage that, how you curb that, is by transitioning to, clean energy, solar energy, right? Or some sort of renewable energy, but that's not happening. And the case is that how you make incentives for that. So I've talked with a couple of startups who were working on carbon credit schemes around Delhi region, in the Punjab area, where there's so much, irrigation pumping is happening for groundwater. And so if you can design some sort of incentive, if you can design some sort of program that helps farmers get more money into their pocket for what they're selling, for what they're doing at this point of time in terms of technology adoption, that can help alleviate some of the fear, or accelerate some of the technology adoption process on that end. So subsidies which governments are providing on irrigation pumps and efficient water technology methods, that can help, but how you design incentive programs will be a key point moving forward. The second is that how you basically do the skill development for them, right? How you do the capacity development for these farmers. That has been a really missing piece. So in my conversation with farmers, they don't even feel like we are underwater stress. But let me tell you, in India, we are amidst a water stress condition at this point, because more than 10 of the states, they are under water stress, and they have lower groundwater at this point of time. Lower groundwater table at this point of time. So how you do that kind of capacity development and skill development for farmers will become really important tool moving forward, on how you educate them about efficient water technology and smart water technology, and you link them with incentives that can provide more money into their pocket for growing crops like millet, and using water efficient technologies or irrigation pumps like solar moving forward.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was excellent. And honestly, the only thing that I would kind of like touch on and then like add to that would just be to think about the like the market system. And so one of Ankit's on his map of the cost of groundwater irrigation, in some of those states it's zero, so it doesn't cost the farmers anything to pump that groundwater. So I think part of it has to do with policies around setting those prices in a way that makes sense, so that you force essentially good water usage practices onto those farmers. Because if you go into this place and say, hey, it's going to be a better return on investment if you irrigate less, right? If you use this soil moisture probe and you irrigate it to this level, then you will be a better steward of your resources. That argument's going to fall real flat on someone who doesn't have to pay anything for the water that they use, and who doesn't understand sort of the larger picture of where the groundwater situation is in that particular state. So I think that there needs to be a coordination, right, with the institutes that govern those natural resources, with the people who are using those natural resources, and there has to be trust there too. Because I think a lot of times, especially, I mean, I don't know, in my experience at least, there's a lot of distrust between farmers who have done the same thing for generations to someone like me with my, ivory tower fancy lab coat and glasses coming in there and saying, hey, you guys should do this, and they're like, we don't care what you think. And it's like, oh, okay. So I think that is also, yeah, building that trust is really important.
Well, thank you both. It sounds like, a lot of these solutions come at the policy level, and the only problem with human systems is that humans run them, right? And sometimes that's a big problem in some of these political systems as well. Other questions for Ankit and Anthony? We've got about 9 minutes before our next session. Again, we're running about 10 minutes behind, but I think that'll be okay in the long run. Any other questions right now? I know we've had a couple people who've dropped off. Again, we're trying to do a global conference. That means it's nighttime somewhere, right? And pouring up just a message that it's 1:40 in the morning. He's stuck with us that long, but he had to jump off. Okay, Elkanah, go ahead. You can unmute and ask your question.
Thank you for your presentation, Anthony and Dr. Chandra. I would want anyone to comment on irrigation of sorghum, because in Africa, we don't use irrigation that much, but we are open to it. The only challenge that I've experienced growing sorghum for the last 4 years is that sorghum is a very unique crop when it comes to times. For example, when it comes to pollination, the bees, and it's like there's a lot of timing when it comes to even nature. So if we are to go to irrigation of sorghum, is there anyone in the meeting that can maybe comment on how the whole ecological system will be able to react to irrigation? Because there are other players like the bees pollinating the sorghum, and the timings, because sorghum is a crop that needs to flower when other crops are also flowering, so that we reduce the pressure from the birds, and we reduce also the risk to the farmers. Thank you.
Well, I'll just lead that off with I'm definitely not an expert with sorghum irrigation, so I think that would be a really great question. If somebody else has some experience with that, that would be awesome. And thanks you, Elkanah. I love having you here in this conversation. I think your voice brings a lot of really necessary perspective.
Okay, I actually had a question for Ankit.
Hang on 1 second. Just 1 second. Let me address Elkanah's. Elkanah, I'm not a trained agronomist, so I don't want to give you an answer that may be wrong. But I'll tell you the same thing I tell everyone. If I don't know, which in this case I don't have the best answer for you, we'll find it. So go ahead again, send me an email. Let me get you in touch with some agronomists. We actually know some agronomists there in Nairobi that are with Advanta Seeds, and they would be excellent resources to you. Levi and his team over at CropSoco have agronomists on staff as well, and they might have some answers for you as well. So we can certainly connect you in the right places. But please send me a message again, sorghumunited@gmail.com, just to make sure that I don't drop the ball on follow-up. Thank you. Okay, Crystal, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to ask, like, what is the most innovative irrigation solution you've seen done there in India?
What are the most, did you say interesting?
like innovative, like in terms of
Innovative.
yeah, what's the most innovative thing you've seen done? Because I've seen our farmers come up with some interesting stuff, but I've wondered, like, what's the most innovative thing you've seen persons done when it comes to irrigation there?
Yeah, that's a really good question, Crystal. Thanks for that. In my opinion, one of the things I really focus on in my talks and presentation is that most of the time it's not about the technology, but how you provide the service in irrigation. And so one of the service provision we have seen around is the mobile equipment hose reel service, which I showed in my one of the slides. So these mobile equipment, what they do is they have a solar, diesel, electric fitted, retrofitted hose pipes, and they go to farms, go farms by farms, and they irrigate the field based on, they call it drip gun. So you can extend the hose through a long area, and you can use the drip guns to basically utilize it as a large sprinkler service. So that's one of the most interesting innovative solution I've seen in India. I don't know if you have seen that in your region yet.
No, what I've been seeing farmers doing is coming up with some type of like pumping systems, like they'll dig their own ponds and jerry rig a type of pumping system to pump water into their fields and farms. But we've been keeping our eye out for things that farmers could build and make themselves. And
Right.
used to, like there, Trinidad, it's 2 seasons, hot and cold, rainy and dry. And this year we're experiencing a particularly dry season.
Yep.
Lots of the dams are drying up, rivers, lakes are drying up here in the Caribbean, all over. So irrigation has been like an ongoing topic in my farmers group, like, how to water, how to keep things going, how to do this, how to do that. So, it was nice to hear this part of the conversation here today. So I was just trying to see what I could take away and say, guys, try this.
Yep. No, that's a fair question to explore different kind of technologies which are happening, different kind of services which are happening. One of the things which I saw in Uganda was there is a company called AgriWorks, and what they do is they have a long hose pipe and they retrofit these pipes to local service provider, somebody who has a bike and is not using. So you can use the bike's engine to pump these irrigation systems. So very cool innovation out there. This company is called AgriWorks. They are based out of Uganda. So that's something you might like to explore.
That's awesome.
I'll definitely want to check them out. Our excuse me, one of our founding members, his name is Nicholas Musisi. He's in Uganda also with a company called NutriWorth. So that information might be something that's very interesting for him to know as well. Thank you.
Hi, Crystal. And so I have recently tried to actually delve kind of into the rabbit hole of answering that question that you just asked. And I just posted an article in the chat. I pulled this off of like the Honduras agricultural minister website. It was in Spanish, so I had to translate it into English. But essentially, it's like a catalog of adaptations that farmers have made to adapt to climate change. And so there might be some interesting things in there that you can kind of pick through at your
cool. English catalog.
yeah. It's
Okay.
so I dropped it into the chat box. So if you can download it, let me know.
I don't. This is pretty cool because our farmers are constantly creating some type of something to try and make it to solve the problem. And I'm always, in awe and fascination of what is being done. It's a marvel what they do with almost nothing.
Well, and so my background is I have an MBA, and one of the things that they always preach about is the innovations in any kind of area are always happening at the fringe. So the people who are actually on the ground doing it, necessity is the father of all innovation, right? So it's really capturing those ideas that people have on the ground and then figuring out how this is working and why it's working and then spreading that message. That's a huge part of what we're like trying to do. And like maybe academics isn't doing a very good job of that, but that's definitely like on the radar. So thank you so much for bringing that up.
No, that's